When the rich wage war, it's the poor who die.
When we play presidential war, the poor get rich in knowledge.
Presidential war. What is it good for intellectual stimulation? Say it again now. Presidential war. What is it good for biscuit indignation? Presidential war.
Hello and welcome to the Dead Presidents Podcast, and welcome to yet another exciting game of presidential war. I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And I'm James J. Hamilton.
And we're back yet again with our self-invented presidential card game.
A game of infinite varieties.
That's it, and ready to have some good discussions. And this time we are doing a 5-category, 5-card draw, where 5 categories are laid out upon the table, and we allocate our 5 cards to these categories in the manner of which we feel they'll be most successful, and, well, see how it goes from there. 5 categories are down, the first of which: who would make the best Supreme Court justice?
I went with Benjamin Harrison.
And I went with William Henry Harrison.
Wow.
It's all in the family in our first category here. Now, in terms of my choice, William Henry Harrison, he was kind of just left to this category. I felt like I had stuff stronger suited for other places, so he was kind of like sure. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, William Henry Harrison, he's got the military mindset about him. I'm sure that he had to, in his time, deal with different court-martial type situations and his long tenure in the Army.
Territorial governor.
That's it, territorial governor of Indiana. He would probably make a fine Supreme Court justice.
Well,
unless you were a Native American taking a case to the Supreme Court.
True. And then you got his grandson, Benjamin Harrison, who did study law, was admitted to the bar, and worked as a lawyer. Worked as a city attorney of Indianapolis before launching into his political career. He served... President Grant actually appointed him to represent Army personnel who were being sued for damages by a gentleman who had been illegally arrested and tried in a court-martial during the Civil War. The Supreme Court had ruled that court-martial was illegal, and then he was pursuing civil damages. But Benjamin Harrison was so persuasive for the defense that I believe the damages award was $1.
Wow. And of course we remember Ben Harrison's infamous, what was it, like a 6-hour closing argument in, what was that case? It was the Pan American Conference.
That was the case where I think he was representing Venezuela.
Yeah.
In a border dispute.
He gave this massive
in an international
argument.
Arbitration.
Ended up losing, but, boy, he's going to put his time in there. I feel like William Henry Harrison would be somebody they'd stick in there just kind of ceremonially. Mm-hmm. That would just kind of be there. Ben Harrison, I think, would be more by the letter of the law. He'd probably be the more, into it justice over his grandfather.
Yeah, I think he could really sink his teeth into the job, and he'd probably do a fine job.
Yeah, I think we're going to go Ben Harrison here.
Benjamin Harrison, taking the category.
Alrighty, and that's going to bring us to our second category here, First Lady Accomplishments. And I went with Julia Grant, by way of Ulysses S. Grant.
And I went with Abigail Adams.
Ooh, a tough nut to crack. is Abigail Adams. Julia Grant, pretty much, she entertained lavishly as First Lady, the social highlight being their daughter's wedding. But outside of that, not
She helped,
really anything to speak of.
helped keep her husband relatively sober
Yeah,
during his presidency.
yeah.
No
But,
mean feat.
yeah, that's it. But on the other side of the coin, Abigail Adams,
Yep, she was
amongst
recently...
the preeminent First Ladies in
Yeah.
American history.
I believe she was recently number 3 on our top 5 first ladies.
Yeah, and I mean, it could be argued that maybe she could be number 1, just because of how ahead of her time she was.
Yeah.
If more women like Abigail Adams were around at the founding,
Yeah.
perhaps things could be significantly different.
Yeah, she was one of the earliest advocates for women's rights and was really her husband's closest advisor and confidant. And that's saying something when you have someone who's as much of an intellectual giant as John Adams to have his wife be his equal.
Not to mention how stubborn
Mm-hmm.
John Adams was.
Right.
But she was the reason
Mm-hmm.
in that marriage.
Yeah, and she was active on political issues while he was president, drumming up support, receiving criticism from the opposition party.
Indeed. Yeah, her neck was out there. And early on, far ahead of her time, this has to go to Abigail Adams by way of John Adams.
Also, one of 2 first ladies to raise one of her own sons to the presidency eventually as well.
Indeed.
Abigail Adams taking it.
And that will bring us to, who would you hire as your lawyer if you were accused of murder? I went with that old-timey, homespun, you could picture Hank Fonda playing him, and indeed he did, Abraham Lincoln.
Wow.
Also portrayed by Raymond Massey.
Nice. I went with William McKinley.
There you go. William McKinley, you know, not a bad choice there. I mean, we got 2 students of the law here. But country lawyer Lincoln, boy, he'd spin a homespun yarn that would have the jury lapping liberally from the palm of his rough-hewn, rail-splitting hand.
Well, I can't argue with that. William McKinley was pretty successful as a lawyer in his own right, Canton, Ohio. Pulled himself up by his own bootstraps, became Stark County prosecutor, spent a lot of time in private practice, pretty successful as a lawyer, but not as renowned as Abraham Lincoln.
No, there's that Lincoln legend, really, you know. There could be a mini-series just about Lincoln as a lawyer, taking on different cases, and...
Yeah, I think
You know.
there's a whole Netflix series called Lincoln Lawyer.
Really?
Yeah, but it's not about Abe Lincoln.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a series of books. It was called the Lincoln Lawyer because it's about a lawyer who drives around in a Lincoln automobile as his like mobile office.
Oh,
That's a series now.
what a cheap way to try and bring in viewers.
Mm-hmm.
You titillate us with the thought of, oh man, a miniseries about Lincoln as a lawyer? That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that could be immediately greenlit. I'm slaking the copyright right now. Stephen Lincoln Douglas came up with this idea.
Yeah.
It's mine.
Turns out it's set in the modern day Los Angeles.
Garbage.
Abraham Lincoln, nothing to do with it.
Probably night but smut.
Well, not
In any
compared
event.
to Law and Order, Abe Lincoln edition. That'd be quite a show. And he's probably going to take it from William McKinley here.
Yeah, I think he
Abe
is.
Lincoln prevailing.
Next up, we have most underrated. And I went with somebody who's been on here before, old John Tyler, who is rated pretty low here, 39 out of 43. But
Yep.
as our listeners will know, John Tyler's a little bit better than 39, certainly.
I went with Zachary Taylor, who's number 31 on here.
Also underrated, as our listeners will remember. Both of these episodes, I think, ought to elevate these particular presidents.
Yeah, we're talking
Somewhat.
about the C-SPAN amalgamation of historians' rankings from 2017. Yeah, Tyler's low. Zachary Taylor, he certainly rose in my esteem when we did an episode on him. I didn't
Same.
know that much about him before. He's pretty kind of forgotten because he died in office, didn't really get to finish what he started. It's hard to judge him as a president because of that. But we liked what we saw from him, and
Yeah, certainly.
you can make a reasonable argument that he could have done some great things if he stayed in office. He was taking some stances that could have done something.
You never know.
But he is rated 31. It's hard to say that he's super underrated on here. He is ahead of Rutherford B. Hayes, George W. Bush, Chester Arthur. I like Zachary Taylor, and I think he deserves more attention, but it is kind of hard to look at this list and say that he should be ahead of many of the people that he's behind on here.
Yeah, it's just a questionable list, I think. I mean, when you have JQA at 21, Grant at 22,
Jimmy Carter at 26.
Yeah, there's some questionable things. I think Zachary Taylor, in my mind, has come a little bit above pure mediocrity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are some, like, middle-of-the-road presidents, and I would put Taylor in, like, middle of the road. I don't think you could argue that he goes beyond that based on, you know, his actual tenure. But I think he is maybe in the upper tier of those middle-of-the-road presidents.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
I would say that you could probably say that as to quality, but then as to quantity of what he got to do.
Right.
But then you got John Tyler, who on this list only Harding, Pierce, Andy Johnson, and James Buchanan are below him,
Yeah.
which is a pretty harsh judgment.
That is a pretty harsh critique. And I think Tyler, like, as president, actually did a pretty decent job considering the expectations.
Yeah.
And it's afterwards when he became a traitor
Yeah.
that, you know.
He, of course, joined the Confederacy as a post-president, but I don't think that should affect his rankings on presidential lists.
No, and he did a lot better than anybody in terms of contemporaries would have given him credit for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the things he did, you know, kind of lasting.
Yeah, the Tyler precedent of just the vice president becoming the president
Yeah.
rather than an acting president or someone who's going to be bossed around by the cabinet. Pretty important.
The Webster-Ashburton Treaty, dealing with Mexico, Texas independence,
Yeah.
you know.
Annexation of Texas. John Tyler brought that to the goal line for James K. Polk to complete.
He did. You got to give credit where credit's due. You know, I don't know. I don't know why Tyler's so low here.
Mm-hmm.
That even, wow, Tyler at 39, William Henry Harrison at 38.
Yep. Herbert Hoover, 36.
Yeah.
I would say that John Tyler is more underrated here than Zachary Taylor.
Yeah. I think both underrated on this list a little bit. But yeah, I'd go Tyler. And that'll bring us to the 5th category here on our table. Who would you rather have date your daughter? I went with Dwight David Eisenhower.
I went with Ronald Reagan.
There you go. We got an interesting choice here. Young Ike, obviously very athletic. And it depends on whether or not we look at him in terms of he's in the service, you know. Because he's been in this category before, and we've talked about it. It is difficult being a military spouse.
Yeah.
And that could be tough, but Dwight D. Eisenhower, a stand-up guy, you're not going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Then on the other side of the coin, Ronald Reagan.
Well, he's got those movie star good looks. And those movie star paychecks.
Yeah.
For a while. And then becoming a actors union president. A little more of a cushier lifestyle for your daughter if she was going to go with Ronald Reagan.
And he was pretty athletic in his youth, too.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he did some footballing, and I know he was a lifeguard for a time.
Mm-hmm. Could save your daughter from drowning.
Yeah.
I don't know, seems like a pretty nice guy.
But is he acting?
Yeah. He's putting on a front.
He classic Phil Hartman SNL sketch.
Yeah, he was divorced from his first wife. I don't recall the circumstances of that right now, but...
I don't think it was anything bad. I think it was sort of an amicable kind of split. I don't think there was any... It wasn't like he was, like, running around, I don't think, or anything like that.
Well, that's always a risk when you got him going out to Hollywood parties. Who knows what might happen?
Yeah.
But I'd trust Ronald Reagan to come
the modern Babylon.
Yep.
No, they're both pretty good choices, I suppose.
Just have more respect from a guy who goes to war in World War I and works his way up through the military ranks than a guy who is really good at pretending to be other guys.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, kinda.
But
Ike was a hero and a footballer. Reagan played a hero and a footballer.
Yeah.
So maybe thereby Ike takes the cake.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that.
Ike will take the cake, but maybe Reagan had a slice of it.
Yeah. Ike edging out Reagan. We're going to move on to 5 new categories, 5 more cards.
Oof, some more tough choices. And some more throwing certain presidents to the proverbial wolves of presidential war in favor of people who I think are better suited for different categories.
Yeah, this could be a tough set of categories all around.
It could be, but
we'll see who we got.
As we proceed here, we have who would make the best Secretary of State? And I honestly think I have perhaps the best card in the game for this particular category, John Quincy Adams.
Wow. Well, I have another president who actually served as Secretary of State, Martin Van Buren.
Wow. And yeah, you got 2 opposing viewpoints here, JQA and MVB.
Well, only one of these guys was on our top 5 Secretaries of State, and he was number 1.
That's right.
And that's JQA.
Yeah, there's really not much of a question here. John Quincy Adams, pre-presidentially, so strong.
Yeah.
And easily the best Secretary of State in history.
Yeah, Martin Van Buren served ably as Secretary of State, but not, like, as much going on. Yeah, JQA presided over some very historic developments in foreign policy, including the Monroe Doctrine.
Yeah. Some incredibly important stuff going down.
The acquisition of Florida, which had been unsuccessful for 20 years or more.
Thank goodness for U.S. history that JQA was the man at the helm during that time, because who knows how it could have played out otherwise.
Yep, well, this hand is going to play out with JQA taking it from MVB.
That's it.
It's going to bring us to our next category, biggest election victories.
Alrighty, and I took kind of a gamble with this, but it was a landslide. Herbert Hoover.
Wow. I went with Grover Cleveland.
Okay. Well, Hoover won election to speak of, and he won it in a landslide, as our listeners will remember from our most recent episode on Herbert Hoover.
That's true. His 1928 victory was huge.
It was pretty crushing.
He won some of the solid South for the first time for a Republican in decades. Just an absolute crushing victory
Over
in the
Al
Electoral
Smith.
College. But then, 4 years later,
That's it.
the tables turn,
Indeed.
and he was crushed, I believe, even worse than he had dealt out to Al Smith.
Yeah.
And those being the only elections Hoover was involved in his lifetime. Did not hold elective office prior. And then you got Grover Cleveland, who won the popular vote 3 times in a row.
Indeed.
In 84, 88, and 1892. Although he did lose the Electoral College there in 88 to Ben Harrison. Won the popular vote 3 times in a row, and the only Democrat
Yeah.
from between the Civil War and Woodrow Wilson.
Right. Yeah, pretty big deal. Grover
And,
Cleveland.
Yeah. The only Democrat after the Civil War to beat a united Republican Party until 1932 when Hoover lost.
That's it.
Cleveland, one of 3 men to win the popular vote 3 times in a row. The others being FDR, who did it 4 times, and Andy Jackson,
Yeah.
who won the popular vote in 1824, despite not winning the presidency.
That's it. I think we got to go Grover Cleveland here.
Yeah, he was pretty remarkable victories coming from a Democrat during that era,
Indeed.
and he did it 3 times. He's going to take it from Herbert Hoover.
Certainly nothing to sneeze at is Grover Cleveland. And that's going to bring us to Best Educated.
I went with the just mentioned Woodrow Wilson.
There you have it. I went with Rutherford Hayes.
Wow. Woodrow Wilson attended Princeton University, then went on to law school at the University of Virginia, then went on to graduate studies at Johns Hopkins, I believe, obtaining his Ph.D., the first and I believe only president to obtain a Ph.D., going on to serve as a professor at Princeton and then president of Princeton, devoting his life to education for most of it until dabbling in politics and skyrocketing to the presidency within a couple of years.
Yeah, there you have it. As for Rutherford Hayes, he attended Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio. Was known as a good student. As a senior, took part in a class revolt, refusing to take a chemistry exam. He graduated class valedictorian in 1842, choosing for his valedictory address the theme, College Life. Then went on to study law and entered Harvard Law School, where his instructors included Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story, legal scholar Simon Greenleaf, and historian Jared Sparks. He graduated in January 1845 and was admitted to the Ohio bar 2 months later. Not too shabby. But,
Yeah, I think, wasn't he the first of our presidential lawyers to have actually graduated law school?
I believe
which
so.
Was a new thing at the time. And,
right.
And he went to Harvard. You can't get much better than that.
Yep, that's it. So, no knocking Hayes here, but I don't know. I mean, Wilson, just because like his background is so rooted in education, you almost have to go with him. But
yeah,
at the same time, like as a historian, he was a complete doo-doo head. And, you know, parts of him make me feel like, well, he's just poorly educated if that's his opinion, if that's what he thinks is right.
Well, he was very highly educated. Maybe he learned some questionable facts, of course, coming from the South.
Yeah.
A citizen of the Confederacy.
Mm-hmm.
In which Union officer Rutherford B. Hayes, one of his enemies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it seems like, Hayes got educated and then went on to a career, whereas Wilson pretty much made a career out of education.
Yeah.
He just kept going back to school.
Yeah, I
kept
think you almost
rising
have
up
to give it
the
to
ranks
him
of schools. I mean, he did do a lot of stuff as Princeton president.
Yeah.
In the subject of education, kind of responsible for the system of majoring and minoring in different fields of study that
I
we
wonder
take
if
for
I
granted
heard
today.
the two like debate or something, if I would think Wilson was more intelligent than Hayes. You know, it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, well, he did hold some reprehensibly racist views, and
That's the problem.
And
there's the beef.
that really colored a lot of his historical writings.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess at the same time, it's hard to take this category away from him.
Yeah. Seems like academia is going to run wild.
Yeah, I think so.
On Rutherford B. Hayes, and Woodrow Wilson is going to lecture his way to victory in this category.
Indeed. Which is going to bring us to who would make the best military general?
Well, we had a lot of presidents who were generals or who served in military command, such as Rutherford B. Hayes. I was stuck with a relatively low-ranking military officer, and I went with Harry Truman.
Wow, okay. That's a pretty good choice, were it not that he was going up against George Washington.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. Although, I mean, you could argue George Washington's early failures at Brandywine and Valley Forge, but
well,
he turned it around and Washington was bad.
I mean, he lost some battles, but he won the war.
He learned from his mistakes. Mm-hmm. That's for sure.
He had some questionable materials to work with.
They weren't about to replace George Washington with Charles Lee at the head of the army.
No. Yeah, he was certainly the man for the job at the time and beat the British Empire that not even Napoleon could.
And even as president, riding into Pennsylvania during the Whiskey Rebellion.
Yeah.
What a show by the president. Just a true badass. But Harry Truman, also a badass.
Yeah.
I'm fond of Harry Truman.
Serving as an artillery commander in the First World War, achieving the rank of major.
And you know, getting in there despite, like, poor eyesight. And rising to the rank that he did. And he was a tough dude. I like Harry Truman.
Yeah, and then he served as commander-in-chief at the end of World War II.
Yeah, and the buck surely stopped with him.
Yeah. A couple of bucks stopped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah.
Certainly showing that as a military commander, he wouldn't shy away from making some tough decisions.
That's for sure.
But he's not going to beat George Washington in this category.
No, I don't think he can. He's a good play. Yeah, Grant would be
well,
quite a battle.
you got Grant, you got Eisenhower. There'd
be some good battles
there'll
there.
be some good battles in future games of presidential war, certainly.
Indeed.
But this time, Washington's taking it. We're going on to our next category. Who would make the best legislator?
And I was kind of left with Chester Arthur.
I went with Millard Fillmore.
Now, Arthur, up until the point that he was president, would be a shit legislator because he would just toe the line of Conkling's machine. And, you know, he wouldn't be necessarily honest.
Well,
But as president, of course, he did a full 180 and redeemed himself, in my opinion. So, if you factor in that kind of thing, it depends on the circumstances there, I suppose.
You know, the kind of old machine politician, Arthur, I mean, he could be...
Effective.
Yeah, he could be effective as a legislator. You'd think that he would be able to step in there and do Conkling-like things.
Well, that's it. He would do the bidding of his higher-ups, and he would probably be real effective at it. But is that necessarily making you a better legislator?
Yep, and that said he didn't actually have legislative experience.
Right.
As opposed to Millard Fillmore, who served many years in the legislature, including the New York State Assembly and the House of Representatives, where he rose to chair the Ways and Means Committee, one of the most distinguished and powerful positions in Congress. He was instrumental in passing the 1842 tariff and earned so much respect in the legislature that he ended up being the choice for vice president.
That's right. Yeah, you can't take it away from Fillmore there. I think he's going to eke it out over Arthur.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Fillmore, pretty impressive legislative career. Gonna take the category.
That's it, and we're going to bring up 5 new ones, as well as draw 5 new cards. Let's see what we have here category-wise. Okay, 5 new categories, 5 new cards. Let's see what we got here with the category, Who Would Win in a Fight? I went with Big Bad Billy Taft.
Ooh. I went with James A. Garfield.
Oh, Garfield, I think, would put up a great fight, but would he be able to wear out the 300-plus pounds of William Howard Taft? Garfield was definitely athletic. He, you know...
Yeah, Garfield was 6 feet tall, 185 pounds, a Civil War veteran.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty tough.
Yeah, Taft, just a big man. Garfield, pretty sizable and a pretty fit dude for the most part. I mean, he grew up working on the canals.
Yeah.
You know, he had to have strength. He nearly drowned one time.
Whereas Taft, you know, he didn't serve in any wars or anything, but, you know, he was a lawyer, a little more of a genteel upbringing, but
a
wouldn't
big
necessarily
dude.
Put it past him. He did rough up a newspaperman, I believe, for slandering his father.
Yeah,
Not afraid to throw his weight around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would be a good battle. I could see it going either way, but part of me wants to give it to Garfield.
Well, as our Presidential Wrestling Federation listeners know, you know, William Howard Taft is pretty formidable, but, you know, maybe a more agile combatant. Need to stay out of his way and use
just wear him down.
Speed
Yep.
to out outlast him.
Garfield might have enough speed backed up with some power to pull that job through.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. I think Garfield could pull it out.
I think so. I think let's go Garfield here.
We'll have Garfield outlast William Howard Taft in the fight category.
Next up, we have pre-presidential accomplishments. I went with Richard Nixon.
I went with Lyndon Johnson.
Okay, well, pre-presidentially, we have 2 vice presidents here.
That's right.
Nixon serving 8 years under Eisenhower and a pretty important vice president. I don't think any vice president was as important until Mondale.
Yeah.
Walter Mondale certainly taking the cake.
Nixon was on our top 5 vice presidents. Lyndon Johnson, of course, only served a little under 3 years as vice president because he successfully masterminded the murder of the president, enabling him to assume the higher office.
What an accomplishment.
Yep. Well, that's
And of
what
course,
some
you know,
conspiracy theorists would say.
Yeah. But of course, Johnson, like a long time politician and a classic example of, you know, a real true, like, Texas politician.
Mm-hmm. We just had the category best legislator. You'd be hard pressed to find someone with more success in that realm than Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
12 years in the House, and then we'll leave another 12 in the Senate, known as the Master of the Senate.
Yeah.
This is the title of one of the volumes of his biography.
Yeah. Nixon, of course, also, you know, you got the Alger Hiss case, where he makes a name for himself.
Yeah, he was pretty successful as a congressman as well. Of course, both of these men losing to John F. Kennedy in 1960.
Mm-hmm.
LBJ in the primary, Nixon in the general. And then Nixon stepping in when LBJ declined to run in 68.
That's it. I think just for Nixon's vice presidency, I would hand it to him.
Yeah, I think I might hand it to him for that, and also for maybe his somewhat more distinguished service in World War II.
Yeah.
Richard Nixon. Snaking the category away from Lyndon Johnson. Which brings us to our next category, Best President Overall.
That's it. I went with James K. Polk.
I went with Grover Cleveland.
Okay, Grover Cleveland. And for this category, you can equate both terms.
Okay, this is the second term Cleveland card, which would be the...
I think it would be unfair to not equate.
Yeah.
Because best president overall, that's the original category of presidential war when we used to play just like who was better, like a true game of war.
Yeah.
You know, but here I think we could argue for Cleveland's
and
2 non-consecutive terms.
I don't think it matters whether I can include all of Cleveland or whatever. The best of Cleveland is not going to beat James K. Polk.
I don't think so. I do like Cleveland. I particularly like first term Cleveland. I think Cleveland would have been better if he had won immediately again.
Yeah.
And then retired instead of like coming back. His second term's a lot weaker than his first.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not that's his fault or not, debatable, but James K. Polk, best single-term president in history. No question. Accomplished everything he set out to do.
Mm-hmm.
And promised not to run again. Kept his promise. I mean, it might not have mattered anyway. He died 3 months later. But super successful president and truly took to the job like nobody else. I mean, he was running everything.
Mm-hmm. Grover Cleveland, somewhat of a workaholic as well.
Indeed, there are similarities between the two.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Cleveland was something of a Polk fan as a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly in terms of work ethic. Took a page from Polk's book, probably not as extreme. Polk literally working himself to death for his country.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any defense of Polk as like a human. But as a president, he's kind of what you want.
Yeah, well, in his private life as a absentee slave holder, not his finest hour.
Right.
But in terms of his political career, pretty successful at what he set out to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's going to take it here.
Yep.
Grover Cleveland, I mean, I do like him. I put him up there, but Polk's like top 3, in my opinion.
He's pretty high.
Next up, most accomplished vice president. And we're going to be visiting somebody that's already been drawn here, as I've gone with John F. Kennedy, thereby LBJ.
Wow.
And as we mentioned, LBJ, master of the Senate.
Yep.
And, you know, coordinating the murder of the sitting president.
Nothing to sneeze
So
at.
they say.
I'm going with Franklin Pierce's vice president, William Rufus King, coordinating his own murder.
Yeah.
Dying just weeks or months into his vice presidency.
William Rufus Devane King was suffering from tuberculosis and was in, I believe, Cuba at the time of his swearing in. He's the only vice president that took the oath of office outside of the United States, and he died within a couple months.
Yep. But had a long career as a distinguished senator from Alabama.
Longtime roommate of James Buchanan.
Yep. Roommate or quote-unquote roommate, depending on
possibly
your
lovers.
perspective. But yeah, I didn't really have anyone great to play in this category, but William Rufus King,
I mean, he did have
the
a
best I can do.
he had a long career, but I think we got to go LBJ.
Yeah. Certainly the two of these men spent the balance of their career in Congress, and LBJ more distinguished there than William Rufus King.
And that's going to bring us to whose family member would make the best president? Now, and this is one that I switched. I was going to use my JFK card here, which I did before. I used Bobby Kennedy. But like to keep it fresh, even if it costs me the card. So, I'm going Barack Obama, and I'm saying Malik Obama.
His brother.
That's right.
Well,
His brother that called him a liar.
his brother who wears Make America Great Again hats.
Right.
And, well, he's going to be facing a tough opponent because I'm going with Jimmy Carter's brother, Billy Carter.
Yes! Billy Carter versus Malik Obama.
These two men,
Running for president.
known from our top 5 most embarrassing presidential brothers episode.
Yeah.
Now, Malik Obama would... He, as Donald Trump liked to accuse Barack Obama of being born in Kenya, I believe Malik Obama actually born in Kenya. So, technically ineligible.
Disqualified.
Which, well, could be a good thing, because Billy Carter would qualify to serve as president, and then we would
Indeed.
have to endure 4 years.
And Billy Carter,
Billy
of course,
Carter.
without even being president, trying to do some presidential style shit during his brother's term. Billy Carter, trying to cut deals
Yeah.
in the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, receiving a lot of money from Libya for unknown reasons.
Maybe Billy Beer was really popular in Libya.
Yeah.
They called it American oil.
Yep. They were trying to invest in Billy Beer.
Yeah.
Which
Billy Beer, the American oil. No, that's funny. Like, obviously, I played Malik Obama as a joke.
Yeah.
I don't know where he was born, to be completely honest. Like, maybe he would be disqualified, but, you know, he's been on, like, Fox News and stuff. He's wearing his MAGA hat, and I don't think he would be a good president.
Well, we could have used these cards to have Michelle Obama and Rosalind Carter go head-to-head,
Yeah,
but
could have.
Billy Carter.
Billy Carter would be a better president than Malik Obama.
Carter. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't argue with that.
Could Malik Obama organize a T-ball tournament, softball tournament, every year?
Not that
Billy
we know
did.
of. Billy, I believe, ran for mayor of Plains, Georgia in 1976, the same year that his brother was running for president. They were on the ballot together, but Billy not prevailing in the mayoral race.
That's it. No, this was
the
more
mayoralty
like
just wasn't big enough for him. He needed to become president.
Yeah, well, I don't know. This was more of like a fun thing. I think we're going to go Billy Carter, but if you're a Malik Obama fan, leave your reasons that he would be a better president than Billy Carter in the comments.
Billy Carter, President of the United States, an unlikely victor in that category. That's going to bring us to our next 5 categories.
Alrighty, and 5 new categories up, starting with First Lady Looks. I'm going with the inimitable Dolly Madison.
I'm going with the imitable Hillary Clinton.
Okay, wow.
Who was... And I don't think I threw that card away. I think she was the most attractive First Lady out of the 5 cards in my hand.
That's interesting. I think, Dolly is just classic. I mean, she's the closest thing to like a Greek or a Roman type portrait of a woman that you could get to in America, you know?
Yep, she was pretty attractive.
Buxom.
Indeed. Very much so. Hillary Clinton, not too shabby. There's some photographs of her when she's younger and during her First Lady days where she looks pretty good.
Well, I mean, she did kind of have that classic 90s look, you know, at the time. Like, you know, the Clintons in the 90s, it just, you know, you're tuning into, you know, Rocco's Modern Life and Ren and Stimpy, and then the Clintons come on, it's like, all right, yeah.
Well, she was an upgrade from Barbara Bush in the looks department.
Barbara Bush, America's grandma. Yeah, I mean, I think we gotta go Dolly. That's just me.
I can't argue
Less
with that.
photographical evidence, but maybe that's for the best. Who knows? Maybe Dolly had really bad teeth.
Well,
We don't know.
she was very admired by her contemporaries.
Indeed. I mean, she was, like, seen as a beautiful woman by a lot of contemporaries.
Yeah.
She's known, you know, for this.
And
that's going to bring us to looks.
yep, we're not just going to objectify the ladies, but the men as well.
Indeed. We can't not.
Who's the best looking president? I could have played Bill Clinton here, but I went with Warren Harding.
Okay, and he's got a decent match up to a certain point, and that means waist up from FDR. Now, FDR, I mean, you know, jokes aside, not a terrible looking dude in his youth. And,
Yeah, he was pretty good looking, and I was, looking into him in preparation for our upcoming FDR episode, and there were some comments made about him as a young man where some women were very taken with his looks, and some people saying that he was the most handsome man they'd seen.
his son, there's like a meme about, is it FDR Jr.?
I'm not sure. He had several sons.
And well, there's one meme with like a picture of his son that people are like, all goo goo gaga over apparently.
Wow.
But FDR, not too shabby. But Warren Harding, he really had like kind of an actor's looks for the time. He could have, when you see pictures of him young, he's at certain times he's rocking a tash, and other times not. But he's got that kind of tall, dark, and handsome look about him. He could have been in. I believe he did do acting in school and stuff. But he had the voice for it, and in his youth, not a bad looking fella.
Yep. People thought he just looked like a president, and he was very attractive to the ladies. Both of these men were on our top 5 presidential adulterers.
Yeah.
They had ladies aplenty.
Yeah.
Who were finding them attractive.
Yeah, I think I'd give the edge to Harding, though.
Yeah, I think I would too. I think he's...
because I don't know. He has more of the look of like an actor or something.
Yeah.
Like if you think of like an actor from the 20s and you look at like a young Warren Harding, you could totally see it. It's like, yeah, he would be like the heroic leading man in a D.W. Griffith movie or something. But yeah, I think we'll go Harding here.
Harding will edge it out, which will bring us to the category post-presidential accomplishments.
That's it. I went with Andy Johnson.
I went with Andy Jackson.
Okay, well, Andy Johnson, of course, post-presidentially, finding something of redemption with a return to the Senate in a sort of belated way. And he didn't really accomplish too much there, but, it was sort of a personal redemption for him, as he was pretty much lambasted as a president.
Yeah.
So that's something to be said. He was actually voted back into the Senate, although I think narrowly. And, still, there's that.
Yeah.
Andy Jackson, the Sage of the Hermitage.
Yeah, he didn't have a lot of kind of active, visible...
It was active, but it wasn't
Right.
visible. He
Exactly.
was still mastering the Democratic Party from behind the scenes. He saw to it that his chosen successors found power. Okay. He seemed to see to it that his chosen successors found power. Martin Van Buren, it didn't really work out. Van Buren was elected, of course, but...
Also... Richard Mentor Johnson as vice president kind of got in there because Jackson picked him, even though other people not necessarily enamored of him.
Weren't thrilled about it, but Jackson had
just a measure.
Sway.
Yeah,
he was the master of the Democratic Party. He was the boss, and he lived long enough to see James K. Polk come into the presidency, and he offered Polk advice early on that Polk took to heart.
Undoubtedly over a glass or two of Old Crow.
Right. As per the classic old ad.
Yep. Jackson favoring Texas annexation.
Yeah.
At that time when that was a critical
because that
issue.
distanced him from Van Buren, of course. And, Jackson, very important post-presidentially, really, because he was a living legend. And what he said, it held salt.
Yeah. I'd say he was more influential than Andy Johnson.
Certainly.
As a post-president,
Yeah.
despite Johnson's brief appearance back in the Senate.
Pretty much
before he
anything
died.
Andrew Jackson would have, like, said if he had written anything that was, like, going to be published or whatever, anything that he said would be taken very seriously by Democrats running for office. If Andrew Johnson said something that was to be published,
Yeah, nobody really would care.
that's it. You know, I think just the weight of Andrew Jackson, he does effectively retire, but he's still pulling the strings from the Hermitage. You know, he's a kingmaker to the end.
He's going to pull the strings out from under Andy Johnson in this category.
And that's going to bring us to, who would you pick first in flag football? And I think I went with a real good, safe choice in George W. Bush.
Well, I went with George H.W. Bush. A
Wow.
clash of the Bushes.
A clash of the Bushes on the gridiron. Oh, man, I think George W. is going to upstage his old man here. He'd be like, come on, Dad. Come on, Dad, you ain't quick enough. Come on, keep up with me. Watch me shuffle.
Yeah, this would be a pretty exciting matchup.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
Bush family, very athletic.
yeah.
Traditionally, both were very avid golfers. George H.W. Bush, of course, on our top 5 most athletic presidents.
Yeah.
For his baseball prowess at Yale primarily. And then George W. also playing baseball, not as at a high level, but
And both, of course,
quite the
golfers.
runner.
Yeah. I just picturing their build, I just feel like George W. would definitely be the scrappier of the two. It's hard because it's father and son, and it's hard to picture them at the same age,
Yeah.
like going head to head. Because if that's the case, like, George H.W. might smoke George W. Bush. But, like, I'm trying to get past seeing it as son and father out in the yard and George W. being like, you know, hey, come on, Dad. Keep up.
Yeah, HW with a little bit of a height advantage. Couple inches taller. Wow.
A great matchup.
Yeah. These two, yeah, they were much more interested in baseball and golf than football, but both very athletic.
Bush, of course, doing his part as a cheerleader to rally the fans, ripping down goalposts. Maybe the rowdier of the two. Maybe that's why I want to give him an edge. He's got the rowdy streak. He might be. I feel like I just feel like he's the more scrappy.
Yeah, and and he was very much a runner when he was president with distance running. I don't know as much about HW in terms of running. I'm sure he had good endurance, but W would probably be able to run all around the field in flag football, and even towards the end of the game, he would still have some stamina.
Yeah, and he could even be drunk while he's doing it.
Yeah, I might have him edge out his father here.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
mean,
very
if they were
close
both
matchup.
standing there, I think maybe something would, like, say they're both standing there and they're the same age, There would be something that would make me think, that guy's going to be more of a hellion. I'm going with him. With George W. Bush.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a very tight matchup there.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I'm not going to put too much stock in the victory there, but my mindset at this point thinks George W. is going to eke it out narrowly over his father. And that's going to bring us to who would make the best attorney general. I went with James Monroe.
I went with Thomas Jefferson.
Ooh.
The man who taught law to James Monroe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Both obviously would be super able and super capable. But Jefferson, you can't get past him.
Yeah. Both studied law, didn't necessarily spend a lot of time practicing it. I think in our last presidential war episode, we mentioned Aaron Burr's slur against James Monroe's abilities as a practicing lawyer.
That's right.
But both men learned in the law. Thomas Jefferson, a lot more learned just overall.
Yeah.
And taught James Monroe what he knew, so...
Yeah, thereby TJ taking the hand with ease.
Becoming Attorney General. And that's going to bring us to the last two cards.
That's it, our final two categories. Our final two cards.
Comes down to this.
And what are we going to have here? I have a turkey, is what it looks like. Okay. Well, first we have, who would make the best Treasury Secretary?
I'm going Calvin Coolidge.
And he's going up against Gerald Ford.
Wow. Calvin Coolidge, famous for his thriftiness.
Yeah.
Presided over one of the most booming economies in American history.
And he was known to keep pretty meticulous notes on his own finances all through his life.
Yeah.
He'd probably be a grade A Treasury Secretary. Ford, I'm sure, would be able, but I feel like Coolidge is going to take this.
Yeah, he certainly had a lot of direct concern with economic policy during his presidency, paying a lot of attention to the budget, to taxes, trying to keep congressional spending under control.
I just think for his notes and stuff, I've read enough on Coolidge to know that he kept real strict track of everything that they bought, every expenditure. Kept pretty meticulous notes on everything.
Mm-hmm.
And was very shrewd.
Yeah.
Maybe to the point of you could have called him stingy, you know, but penny saved is a penny earned.
Well, when you're dealing with the public money,
Mm-hmm.
it might be a good quality.
That's for sure.
I think he said, we're trying to remember his quote, but something like, it's so easy to spend the public money because it doesn't
seem to belong to anybody.
Right. But
yeah.
he knew that it did.
Exactly.
And
that's
stingy
an important
even with
distinction.
other people's, yeah. Not many politicians are stingy with other people's money like Calvin Coolidge was.
Yeah. I mean, Jerry Ford, I'm sure he'd be able. Certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we go Coolidge. And actually, Jerry Ford's wife would have been a better choice for our next category, which is biggest partier. And I was left with Teddy Roosevelt.
I went with James Buchanan.
Okay. Well, I mean, Teddy Roosevelt made a scene at parties. He was usually the loudest voice in the room. I think people at parties tried to avoid him.
His daughter Alice said he wanted to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral.
That's just it. And he loved attention and being in public. And sure, he was definitely going to be at any party being thrown. Buchanan, pretty big affinity for social gatherings, parties.
Mm-hmm.
Loved his scotch.
Yeah, he was number 5 on our top 5 drunkest presidents.
Yeah.
He could hold his liquor.
He really thrived in those social scenes. That was where he was at his best, probably.
That's just seems like the kind of politician he was. He could mingle
he
well.
Loved mixing.
Got along with people.
Mm-hmm.
He liked chatting up the ladies, and that's all with the ladies.
He was known for flirting with ladies all the time, and he was known to be able to really hold his liquor, and yeah, he was certainly doing more partying than Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, as for a guy who, I mean, he didn't really have, as we've talked about before, any like really signal achievements during his long pre-presidential career, but he was always close to the center of power because
Yeah.
he was really good at navigating kind of the social aspect of power and the party machine aspect, because
Yeah, you got to give him credit for that.
he knew how to have a good time with his fellow congressmen, and
Indeed.
he's gonna party his way
To victory in this category.
James Buchanan taking out Teddy Roosevelt, something that can only happen on presidential war.
That's just it. And that's going to bring us to the card count. And we're back with the results. I finished with 20 cards.
And I had 24.
Another
Turns out
victory for James J. Hamilton.
James Buchanan's triumph there at the last hand was the deciding factor.
Indeed. Another interesting game of presidential war, as always. And, of course, the true winner, as always, our listeners. Who, no doubt, play at home. As they should.
Presidential war, America's pastime.
Indeed. For the Dead Presidents Podcast, I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And I'm James J. Hamilton.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.